Welcome to Your American Dream. I'm Anisha Jennings, and today we're exploring a remarkable 40-year journey of transformation with Andrea McLean, whose path from Jamaican immigrant to corporate executive to empowerment coach proves that sometimes our greatest setbacks become our setup for serving others. I'm excited to welcome Andrea to the show. Andrea is a first generation Jamaican immigrant who arrived in the US 40 years ago and built an incredible 35-year corporate career spanning multiple industries, including food, financial services, and beauty. After navigating the complexities of corporate America and rising to executive levels, Andrea made a bold transition last August to become a board certified coach specializing in empowering diverse women through her signature S.O.A.R method. She's also the author of Decide to Be Your Future Self and a passionate advocate for diversity and inclusion. Welcome, Andrea. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Anisha. It's an honor to be here on your podcast today.
Thank you. So, tell us a little more about Andrea. I know when we chatted, we spoke about how you came here 40 years ago and your journey through different stages of the corporate America to your health to your transition. So, tell us briefly about your early life to where you are right now.
Sure. I guess where do I start? So, growing up, as you mentioned, I'm from Jamaica. And so growing up, going to high school, I did well in the sciences, and I went to university and was doing all of the prerequisites for medicine because that was the vision my parents had for me. I was going to go to medical school. And the third year into doing my chemistry undergrad degree, I realized that I really didn't have that passion for medicine. And so I had to have the courage to tell my parents, particularly my mother at the time, that I was not going to go to medical school. And I remember, though, sitting on a bench on the campus in my final year thinking, okay, now what? What am I going to do with this chemistry degree? And as it would so happen, my family had the opportunity to migrate to the US right after I graduated with my 4-year degree. So when I got to the US, then I determined, how am I going to work? I didn't know anything about corporate America. My parents, my mother had been a teacher and a school vice principal her whole career. My father was in the public health sector. So, they didn't have the US corporate America experience. But anyway, I, applied and got my first corporate role at Nestlé in the food industry. And that's where my corporate America journey began. And, went, as you mentioned, to multiple industries, but then had to learn how to navigate in this new space where I didn't have anyone who had that experience who could tell me, some of the things that I needed to be on the lookout for. But that's how I got into corporate America. Thankfully, my chemistry degree landed me in a product development role at Nestle. And then from there, I transitioned on to other roles.
Wow, yes. There's so much to unpack there. So, number one, you said, you pursued your mom's dream of being in the med school. How
Mm-hmm.
did that feel like? And what happened when you told them that that's not something you want to pursue?
So I think it happened because, again, and you're from an immigrant background too. So, when you're really good at sciences, there are just certain careers as an immigrant family that you pursue. It's medicine, it's, law, it's engineering, especially, if you're good in the sciences, you've got to go to medical school. And I had a number of my teachers who were also saying that, she should go to medical school. So it was kind of like the story I was hearing and I was believing. Then I realized it wasn't really my story, but it was what I kept hearing. And, I know my mother was disappointed because this was going to be a big deal for my family because there were a lot of nurses in my family, but I would have been the first doctor in my family. So, this would have been this feather in I don't know whose cap, but in the family's cap.
Yes.
But, I think she understood and I think she realized I was going through this rigorous chemistry undergrad and she could see the toll it was also taking on me because it was a very intense program. And I think I appealed to her when I said, medicine is going to be even harder. I'm really not passionate about it. And it's going to probably cause more stress for me. So I think that's where we came to terms and, she finally understood and forgave me for not going on to medical school.
Oh my, that's such an immigrant story, right? Like
It
most.
is.
So, how did your family's decision to immigrate impact your career trajectory?
Well, actually, as I think back on it now, probably, so I remember, I'll backtrack a little bit. I remember when I was doing my undergrad degree, I went on some internships during the summer in my last 2 years. And I actually, funny enough, I was working for a liquor company doing testing in their lab, which was a whole interesting story I won't even get into. But the woman who was the head of the lab, she said to me, she said, "You don't want to graduate and work in a lab. You need to get on the business side." And so that had stuck in my head. And coming to the US, then I realized, let me get on the business side. I took that advice from that mentor. And, it really helped me in terms of deciding that I wanted to go into the corporate space, but not necessarily always sticking in the lab. Although I came into product development and I started in the lab, I quickly moved out of the lab because one of my bosses moved me into the customer care area.
That's amazing. So, what drew you to chemistry in the first place? Like the sciences have physics, biology. How come you got like into chemistry and how did that degree set you apart?
Yeah, well, actually, I'll tell you how it set me apart because that's how I got the job at Nestle. But I was good at all the sciences. I was good at math. I was good at physics. I didn't really like biology as much, but I got really good grades in it. But after I did like the general sciences my first 2 years of university, then you had to do a major for the next two. And at the time, it's like, what do I want to do? And then I thought, no, I like physics, but I don't think I like it that much to do it as the degree. And I thought about doing biochemistry, but it was, very competitive. It was the newest thing in the university. And so there was this program called special chemistry, which was solid chemistry. I mean, I didn't do anything except chemistry. It was organic, inorganic, physical. It was just chemistry. And I thought, there was a lot of competition for it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do that. Because at that time, that was my third year, and I still hadn't made the decision not to go to medical school. So I figured it was still on the right path. So that's how I ended up with doing chemistry.
Oh, that's lovely.
But to your question, because I did that special chemistry degree, interesting story. When I applied to Nestle, the man who then became my boss, he told me, he said there were 200 people who had applied for this job. And when he looked at my resume, he saw this special chemistry degree from the University of the West Indies. And it just so happened he had a colleague that worked for the company in Canada, and she had also done that degree. And he reached out to her and said, I have this resume from, this person. She has this special chemistry degree. She told him, if she got through that degree, she's smart. You need to hire her. The rest is history.
Yes, indeed. That was going to be my next question, but you answered it already because I think that's such a lovely story that, how it set you apart and you got your first breakthrough that. You
Yes.
stayed at Nestle for 12 years. So
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about that journey and, the challenges you faced and the things that you learned and people you came across and the impact that had on your career.
Yes. So I will tell you, the people that man that hired me and his boss, I am still in touch with them now, 40 years later, and we have a lunch once a year. So it actually, you have to maintain your relationship. So I'm just going to throw that to anyone who's an immigrant who's in this country. Form some solid relationships because you never know how that's going to weave through your career. And actually, that woman, she's the one who got me to the last role I was in before I moved out on my own. So I just want to put that out there is that, getting to that Nestle role and the relationships that I built, it taught me about connections and how to relate with others and how to maintain those relationships. But it also gave me exposure to marketing, to legal, to product development, to the quality folks, to the folks who were making the product in the manufacturing facilities. I got the opportunity to travel to some of our manufacturing facilities and look at like the first production run of the product that I had developed at the bench. So it was a really great experience to meet people, to see how things operated in the corporate world, and just to understand some of the dynamics and the politics that you have to navigate when you're in corporate America.
Yes, absolutely. So, the more I am in this journey, I realize that entrepreneurship is all about community, building
Mhm.
connections, and not doing it alone, because there are people who have done it, and building connections is such an important aspect of entrepreneurship. So, thank you for pointing that out. So, you moved multiple locations throughout
Yes.
your career. Tell us a little bit about how did you navigate moving, relocating so many places through your corporate career?
Yeah, it's now that we look back sometimes, my husband and I say, gosh, wow, how did we do it? But at the time, some of it happened just because of circumstances in the company. So the first move, when I was with Nestle, the company headquarters was in New York, and I was working in New York. And then Nestle bought the Carnation Company. But then after the merger, the company headquarters moved out to Glendale, California. And about 300 people were offered an opportunity to move, and I was one of them, luckily. And I thought about it for a while. Are we going to make this big move all the way across the country? We didn't know anyone there. And at the time, I had a 3-year-old son as well. And my parents were in New York. I know my son was really like, the apple of his grandfather's eye. And I, knew it was going to be hard not being close to family. But we thought, we're young. Let's move. Let's try this maybe for 5 years. We gave ourselves a time frame, and we made the leap to go to California. And for about 3 years or so, every school holiday, my mom and dad would be on the plane and they'd spend summer with us. So that made up for it. But and then along the way I had my daughter in California, and they came and spent time again, and so it made it manageable. I wouldn't say it was easy, because again, we didn't have the support system there. And one of the kids got ill, I would take a day off, my husband would take the next day off. I mean, we'd alternate just so that we could keep our careers going. But yeah, we managed it. 4.5 years or so into it, that woman who I mentioned was my boss's boss, that first Nestle job. I happened to be at a conference for, the food industry. And she was there, and there was someone that she had now on her team because she didn't make the move to California. And that person said to me, a headhunter called about this role, and do you think you'd be interested? I can give them your name. And I said, where is it? She said, in Florida. I'm like, well, it'd be closer to New York, it would be warm weather still, so yeah, sure, give them my name. Did the interview, I flew down. I actually had 6, if I remember now, interviews that day with different people. I flew in the morning. Well, actually, no, I flew in the night before. I had the interviews, and then I flew out that night. And, it was actually on my birthday. So I took my birthday off. Nobody really knew that I had gone for an interview. And, it's just life. Sometimes you have to navigate. And I'm throwing this out because you have to be resilient. Because when I got back to California, my son wasn't well, and my husband picked me up at the airport, and we went straight to the emergency room with him. So, sometimes you have to just deal with the challenges that come your way. But after all of that, about 2 weeks later, I was offered the job, and we moved to Florida. So that was the first move.
Wow. And then you came to Pennsylvania and then New Jersey. Tell us
Yes.
a little bit about that, those transitions as well.
Yes. So after being in Florida, in the financial services, that same woman who I mentioned, she was setting up a new call center for customer care in Pennsylvania for the company. And at the time when she talked with me initially, she said she was looking at putting it in Florida. And I said, excuse me, I'd love to work for you again. So if you have it in Florida, yeah, count me in. But then a few weeks later, she called and she said, we're going to do it in Pennsylvania because there's a distribution center right there, and the products are there if you need to send them to customers. And do you still want to come? And I said, all right, I tell you what, well, we'll fly up to look at the area, where it is, where I could potentially live. And, got my brother on board because he was still in New York. And of course, he was now excited that we would be closer, and, my mom would be here as well. So yeah, so that's how I started with that role. And was there for a number of years, but then that role, setting up this call center in Pennsylvania, evolved into now being in the corporate group. And I was commuting from Pennsylvania to New York City about 4 days a week. And it was a it was a long commute, like 3 hours each way some days. So that's why we moved to New Jersey, because it was, if you're gonna keep commuting to New York, let's make it a little bit more palatable. And my husband was working in Pennsylvania, so New Jersey was kind of like the middle ground. He went one direction, I went the other direction. So that's, we made all of those moves.
Amazing. That's just definitely resilience and, wanting to make things work and following your passion.
Mhm.
So, you did talk about politics in corporate America. Tell us a little bit about how did you handle that as a woman of color?
So, the funny thing is that I always look at, people are people, regardless of what you look like. You're going to have people who are for you and you're going to have people who are against you. So what I did was to try to figure out, like, who are the influencers, who are the people who are my supporters, who are going to be my sponsors and advocate for me when I'm not in that meeting, and then who are those that I need to kind of just keep a watch on, and not believe that necessarily they're going to be supportive of me, even though it might appear that way. So it was just about trying to listen, and I'm good at listening and picking up on body language and understanding the dynamics, and knowing who to go to when. And the hierarchy. You wouldn't go to your boss's boss to say your boss isn't doing something properly. There are different channels to go through. So that's what I had to learn to navigate. But most importantly, like, who were the influencers? And I'll tell you some advice that same woman gave me when I joined her in my last company. She said to me, get to know the administrative assistants, the executive assistants of the senior folks that you have to work with. Because many times, if you need a meeting set up or if you need to get through, a point, they will connect you. And I found sometimes that some of those team members were like my strongest sponsors, just because we'd built a relationship. They knew what I was trying to accomplish. I needed to get a meeting set up to navigate, an issue that might have cropped up, because I worked globally. So I had to work with privacy regulations in China versus, Europe versus the US, and trying to get all the attorneys sometimes to agree on what the statements were we were going to put on our consumer care notices. So I had to be very diplomatic, but still make sure that I got the agenda accomplished.
Perfect. That's some great advice. So, what gave you the confidence to go full time coaching? How did that transition happen?
Yes. So I actually, in my book, Decide to Be Your Future Self, I tell the story where I had got to this point where I was anticipating a promotion. And when the promotion didn't come through, there was changes in leadership. They wanted to take the whole function in a different direction and merge it with another group. I kind of sat back and said, okay, so what's next for me? Am I going to wait to see if maybe in a year I get either this promotion or a different promotion in another group? Or am I going to take the reins and really decide what to do with my next self? So that's when I decided and thought about it and said, "Yeah, I have been coaching all this time throughout the years, but I had not got the credentials to coach." And so that's when I decided to go and get my credentials to coach. And I had been doing a lot of coaching with the Women's Leadership Employee Resource Group, and I was leading the mentorship and the sponsorship pillars for that group. So it was natural, and people had been sending junior women of color to me to kind of mentor and get them to think about who could sponsor them. And one day I was talking to this young woman, and I just sat there, and it's almost, I can't describe it, more so like I felt like almost like this out of body experience as I'm talking to her. And it was like, this is what you're meant to be doing. And so that I, took the time to get through the process. Actually went back and did my master's in organizational leadership, because I felt, chemistry degree is great, but I wanted to have some other solid footing if I was going to work with organizations, and did the coaching certifications. I actually did 4 coaching certifications along the way, and then decided I was now ready to take that leap.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, because I know you mentioned about the promotion, and that's kind of, what did that feel like? Like being passed over for promotion, what did that feel like? And I know your company, the coaching started out of it, but at that moment, what did that feel?
I mean, there's a level of disappointment because this is something I had been working towards for many years, and it was just like, okay, what happened? Why did this not work out? And then I realized that sometimes when doors close, it's because there's a better door that needs to open. So I chose to look at it in a positive light and not, kind of sit around in my tears and my pity, have a pity party. I just thought, okay, this is a signal here. Yes, I'm disappointed. This is not how I expected it to turn out, but I need to move on here. And thankfully, I have support with my family, with friends, and I kept going.
Amazing, amazing. So, tell us a little bit about your signature coaching methodology and how did you get inspired to start that?
So the S.O.A.R method is what it's called. And the S stands for shift your mindset. The O is overcome challenges. The A is activate your plan. And then the R is reflect and refine. And that, I realized, was the process that I went through as I was making this transition to become a coach that would then set me up to move out on my own. And really, the shifting the mindset, I had to shift my mindset to not think, why me? Why didn't this happen? I had to shift my mindset to, what's the opportunity here? What's the next door I need to open if this one is closing? And then I had to overcome the challenge because, as I mentioned, I went back to school to do my master's, and I'm working full-time global role, commuting to New York. So I started doing my homework on the train or the bus coming back to New Jersey and using my cell phone as a hotspot, because one of the things I had always done throughout my career was to have 2 cell phones. I kept the corporate cell phone, but I had my personal cell phone. So if that rang, I knew it was family. I never intermingled the two. So at least I had my personal cell phone to use as the hotspot, did my homework and my assignments in the online portal. So I had to overcome that challenge. And then I had to activate the plan. So again, signing up for all of those classes every semester, signing up to do the course that would then allow me to sit for the exam and get the board certification as a coach. And then reflect and refine. Along the way, I would reflect, am I still moving in the direction that I want to go in? What do I want to tweak here? Because if I remember, there was a different major I had instead of organizational leadership. And then I switched that about 2 years into this 3-year program, saying, no, maybe I need to hone in on organizational leadership. So it's always good to reflect, but then refine. It's okay to make changes if we're going on the journey and we need to tweak or adapt. So that's my S.O.A.R method, and that's the framework that I use when I'm helping my coaching clients to move from one spot to another, to get unstuck, to really get their best future that they're envisioning for themselves and that is unique to themselves. Because we shouldn't be cookie cutters of somebody else. We should live our own journeys and really leverage the strengths that we have to become that best version that we can be.
Absolutely. That's lovely. So, what's your approach to building confidence in diverse women?
I think it starts with the story, or at least recognizing the story that we tell ourselves. And if you're from an immigrant background, you might believe that you shouldn't be speaking up in meetings, that you should always defer to whoever is the most senior on the team, or that, this is just not for you. And so this is about being fearless and realizing that you have a voice. What you have to say does matter. And yes, you have to be strategic sometimes in how you present that voice. but it's really just believing in yourself. And one of the paradigm shifts I had to make for myself was that, I thought it was bragging, and I never wanted to come across as bragging because I was raised that, it's not good to brag. But when I heard somebody say, you're not bragging, you're informing. If you don't tell them, how are they going to know your skills or your capabilities? And so that's what I would say in terms of driving that confidence is, don't think of it as bragging, or don't think of it as I shouldn't be doing this because it's culturally not what I was raised to do. But think of it that you're in a new environment. You've got to play in this new space. And if others don't know what you're capable of doing or delivering or the value that you're adding, you're not going to get those opportunities. So that's that story that you need to change internally for yourself so that you have that confidence to step forward and really make sure that others know your accomplishments and how you bring value to a team.
Absolutely. That's great advice. So, you have written this book called Decide to Be Your Future Self.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about your book and what can our listeners, like some of the takeaways that they can get from the book and why they should purchase the book.
Okay, so decide to be your future self. Again, the big message I have in there in the beginning is that it's not too late to pivot, and it's not too late to try something new. And in the introduction, I say that my mother was my inspiration because when we moved to the US, she started to teach at a private school, but realized that the pay wasn't that great at this private school in New York City. So she wanted to work in the New York City public schools. But she got the job, but in order to get tenured, I think is what it was, she had to do her master's. And so at 60, she went back to school and did her master's in special education so she could get tenured. And so that's the inspiration in the book, is that it's never too late. And then I walk through the sections. So shift your mindset. What are the limiting beliefs that you have? What's your vision? If you start to think about your future, what's the vision that you have? So that's the shifting that mindset. And then the overcoming challenges. It's about what are those obstacles you're going to have to navigate to get there? Because if you don't articulate them and you suddenly come up on them, then you're going to get the wind blown out of your sails, so to speak. So at least if you can articulate some of these challenges, you're not going to know them all, but at least the ones that you know that you can control, at least if you can identify those, you can figure out a pathway to get around it. And then activating the plan. If you have this dream and you're wanting to get to a new destination or a new career, open up a business, whatever it is, if you're not articulating that into goals and then some sub goals that you can take action on, it's still going to just remain a dream. So we all have to take action. And then the reflect and the refine, as I was mentioning, it's like celebrate your progress is one of the things that I say in the book. The small milestones. Don't wait till you get to, 3 years later, yes, I made it. Celebrate the milestones along the way because that will encourage you and give you motivation to keep going. And then also be willing to tweak if you need to and refine because life is dynamic. And maybe 2 years ago, you had a different thought. And now that you understand what's involved in this direction or this role you're pursuing, you might want to do something slightly different.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. For our
Mhm.
listeners, the link to the book to purchase the book will be in the show notes. Before we wrap up, can you give us some advice that you wish you knew when you were starting off as this young woman of color, an immigrant woman, that you would like to share with other women who are probably in this space and who are trying to start their career or pivot?
I wish I had really realized that I needed to hone my strengths and not try to be like anyone else. And for years, I heard from bosses, not the ones that I mentioned in the beginning at Nestlé, but some other bosses in other industries, that I needed to be a certain way. And they happen to have had military backgrounds. They thought that I needed to be firmer, that I actually, one of them told me I treated people with too much respect, so it was, and that it bothered me for a while. But then I eventually realized that I needed to be me because that was my superpower that was, being diminished if I was going to try to step out of that superpower. So I would say to women, especially women of color, own who you are, be authentic in who you are, try to engage in conversation and discussion so people understand where you're coming from, how you were raised, your culture. Because I think if people understand you, then there won't be this disconnect, or they'll see why you're acting a certain way. But then on the other hand, be willing to learn from others as well. Because again, you've got to learn how to navigate the politics. So although I'm a Jamaican and this I understand that culture, etc., I've got to figure out how I'm going to navigate the corporate space and the expectations there and to show up differently. And so I really wished I had learned that huge lesson, because I got that along the journey, but I wish I had learned it even earlier, because I think it could have even fueled my career further. Now, I'm not one to say I wish, because I actually think that what I'm doing now is what I was meant to be doing, and that all those experiences have informed my coaching practice today. But again, just believe in yourself, show up for who you are, and don't diminish your light for someone else, is the advice I would give.
Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being here today and sharing your lessons learned and your experience. We truly appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anisha. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. As we conclude our inspiring conversation with Andrea, remember that every career transition is an opportunity to align your purpose with your passion. If you're ready to share your transformation story through a website that truly reflects your mission, I'd love to help create that digital platform through custom WordPress or Squarespace websites. This is Anisha Jennings reminding you that sometimes our most powerful work begins when we decide to be our future selves. Until next time.